Well, hello, I'm Adam Trujillo with the Harker Heights Activity Center. Today I'm going to show you how I pitch a tent and give you some helpful hints of when you're setting up your campsite. First thing when I get to a campsite, I like to get there during the day so that you have daylight, and then if you need to leave the park or wherever you're staying to get whatever equipment, you got time after you set up your tent. Just in case you forget something or something breaks, you need to pick up some spare parts. You can always go to the store if there's a store in driving distance. Next thing I do when I get to a campsite, I check for trees. I do not want any dead trees above me or trees that have big dead branches above me. We call them widow makers. You don't want to wake up with a tree falling on you in the middle of the night. So you want to make sure if you are under a tree, make sure it's a good, strong, healthy looking tree. Also, when you are picking out where you're going to put your tent, you're going to want to make sure that you are on high ground and that you are sort of on like a slight hill. It doesn't have to be a tall hill, but you want, if in case of rain, you want the water rushing down off of you and not sitting in a bowl where that water is going to sort of just sit there and fill up your tent, because that's no fun. Okay, first thing first, you roll out your tarp. You want your tarp anywhere from 6 inches to a foot bigger than your whole tent. This tarp's a little bit smaller, but we're just going to use it for a demo. And then you put all of your tent poles together and you lay them out. I do this so I can see which is my long poles, which are my short. There's going to be some tents out there that only use 2 poles. This one, for the main tent, it actually uses 4 poles. It's a really big tent. This is good for family campouts. And it holds about 8 people, it says, but I would do 5 to 6 comfortably, depending on how small your kids are. So we've got our poles laid out. If you don't know how your tent is set up, if it's your first time setting up a tent, or the first time you're setting up your tent, usually in your tent bag, you will have a little diagram of how it's laid out. So we have our big long poles are going to sit across on the tent, and then we have the 2 smaller ones that are going to hold open our sides. All right, so we got our tent laid out. We want it all nice and flat. It's kind of windy today, so I put a couple of stakes out so it's just not flying away. And then you lay your tent poles about where you're going to want them. So that one's going to come across. That's our long one. Got another one that's going to feed this way. And then our 2 shorter ones. Now these are poles through the tubes. Now I never step on my tent, especially with shoes on. If I need to, I will take off my shoes and walk on them with my socks. And this just helps protect the tent. Tents aren't cheap. A family size, a cheap family size one is going to run, about $100. So you want to make sure you protect that tent. That's also why I try and get as thick of a tarp, a ground tarp, when I lay it down. That way it protects if there is a rock or something underneath the tarp and you're walking on it, you're not going to punch a hole through your floor, because that helps keep the water out. You definitely want that all working in good condition. Okay, so we have the 2 center poles in, and what we're going to do is we're going to feed the next 2. So we got all 4 of them through the cloth tubes. This one has a cloth tube. There's some tents that you just plug in the sides and all the tent clips on. But this one has this tube that it feeds through. So I want all of them at least through the tubes before I start lifting up. And that's just going to help me when I start lifting it. That way it's not all going crazy all at once. You're not doing a juggling act. All right. I'm going to plug this side in first, and then I'll walk over there to lift it up. this tent just has plugs, and so that tent pole just slides onto it. Sometimes you'll have a little pocket. All right. So I got that side plugged in just on those middle ones. Okay. And then what I'll do, just to sort of balance it out, is I'll plug in this side, get this side ready to go. And these are the shorter poles on the outside of the tent. Okay. So I'm going to start with the middle one. I'm going to grab that tube and just pull and push all at once. It's going to look a little funky on this style of tent just for now. It'll all get straightened out towards the end. That pole is sort of zigzagged, but it'll be fine. Once it pops up, it'll be good. This is a big tent, so it's got a lot of weight to it. So it's going to do a couple of weird things. Don't worry about it. It'll all work out. All right, so I got those center ones. Make sure these are plugged in, and then we'll go to the other side and push this way. All right. Even this out just a little bit. And grab that tube and push through. All right, and then on this and most tents, you'll have clips, and all those clips get clipped on. And that keeps, right now everything's kind of sagging. That will help open it up some. And then with this type of tent, I would never bring to a rocky campsite. Because as you can see, if you can't stake it down, this is gonna sort of frill up and roll up, bunch up, and you're not going to have as much sleeping space, and it's not going to hold together as well. So always research, what part of the country you're going to, or if you're going to a state park, make sure you see what kind of campsites they have. Sometimes they build up dirt and stuff around the campsite to make it more comfortable and easier to set up tents. And we're just going to keep going through and keep getting all of these. Okay, we have them all clipped. As you can see, it's starting to roll up. So we're going to stake it out next and get that floor all the way out to the sides. All right, so we got all staked out, and we have a couple of problems with this tent. So if you come over here, I'll show you in another video how to repair some of this stuff that's a normal wear and tear on a tent. This tent is about 15 years old, so it's got some use over the years. So this webbing needs to be replaced. It's just easy sewing. And then we actually have one of these poles that are snapped, and I'll show you how to fix those too. You don't need to throw away the tent if you just have minor repairs that need it like that. All right. So next you can see that our tarp here is sticking out further than the tent, which is what we want when it comes to tarp size. As you can see, this tarp needs to come over about 5 feet. So if this tarp was actually for this tent, you would want to buy it, make sure it's a little bit longer. And then your tent box or your tent bag should have the size of your footprint for the tent. So that helps when you're buying tarps. Now, when it rains, right, if we left the tarp how it is, the water would hit that tarp and be able to come under the tent. And so we want to make sure that you don't see that tarp. However, you don't want to roll it under like that, because what you're doing is you're folding up that side, you're making a bowl. You want all that water to be able to rush off. In case you spring a leak and say your rain fly, you want to make sure that water has a place to go. So the whole tarp, you go around the tent, you fold underneath, and you want anywhere 4 to 6 inches inside of your actual edge of the tent. So we'll do that all the way around. All right, that way you don't see that tarp all the way there. Right, now if you have little kids and you don't want the inside of your tarp, the bottom of your tent ripped up, you might want to lay down a blanket or a tarp before you start moving everything in. This is just an old blanket that you can lay down, and that way it protects the floor. Or what I usually use is this big heavy canvas tarp, especially if you have cots. Those feet will rip into that floor, and you don't want that. You want it nice and watertight, and so this helps protect it, especially with little kids. And then next, you can start moving in all your stuff. I carry a sleeping roll in the winter. These are really important. They help insulate you from the cold ground, and they have a couple different versions. This one is made for more backpacking. Well, they both are, but this one's a little bit bigger, but it fits in smaller space because it blows up. So it's like an air mattress, but it only inflates about 2 or 3 inches. And then this is just a foam mattress. So you can use those. They're comfortable, and in the winter, like I said, they're important not just for comfort, but to keep you actually warmer. And then of course, a sleeping bag. Now, even in the summers, I'll still carry a sleeping bag, usually just for comfort, but you never know. We do live in Texas, especially if you're out in the desert, it can get pretty cold. And so this is just a couple of hints how to set up your tent a little bit better. And then I always carry buckets. And now these buckets will be over at like my picnic area and my outdoor kitchen space, because I'll keep food in there. You can lock it up, you can tie rope around it. That way raccoons and other things can't get into it. I never put food in my tent, especially if I go out to Colorado. If this tent had any food in it ever, I would never bring it out there. Anywhere where there's bears, little critters and stuff, they'll smell candy wrappers and old food, especially if it's caked on there. If you spilled something like Gatorade or something, only water goes in my tents, and that way I can use them wherever I go camping, and I don't run the risk of animals in my tent. Hope some of these tips help next time you go camping. Check out tomorrow night. We will be having a virtual campfire, and have a happy 4th of July.